NTV.
A very good morning. It's the third day of January 2016, and yes, we're trying to find our feet into the new year. It's not the kind of year where you say, well, we hit the ground running. No, it's just one of those where you've got to feel the depth of the river by not plunging in with both feet. Just take one step at a time and see how it goes, but also walking with caution, just like chameleons do. The chameleon would never release the back leg hold before it's sure it has a firm grip at the front. And so this is how we're moving cautiously, especially here on the big story. We've got to set the agenda and know what will be the big stories of 2017 and just how much will they influence the way we cover them as journalists, but also importantly, the spillover from 2016. What is it that tends to, influence how the year starts from how the year ended? And like I said earlier on in the press review with Mabel, looks like we haven't crossed over. Only the 7 digit has changed on our year, but everything else seems to be the same. The political scribbling still continues to remain the same. The usual needs and desires that the government continues to fail to provide to us remains the same. Perhaps you have remained the same and just only become slightly older, but maybe not even wiser. So this morning on the big story, we're trying to set ourselves into the context of what will influence the way we cover these stories, and what will make it the big headlines, the big stories, and what will, in fact, shape the way we live from a political, from an economic, from a social perspective, as a country and as a region. This morning on the big story. Raymond is a young man with a good head properly screwed on his shoulders. Good morning, Raymond.
Good morning, Simon.
An astute star-rising reporter with the Daily Monitor sometimes, and of course, interestingly, with NTV. You have been at the forefront of some of the biggest stories that closed out 2016, and part of these stories that you covered very seriously tend to be in the position of spilling over into 2017. And so we'll start from that perspective of how you expect them to shape the way we report about them, but also importantly, how it could all end. And I'll take you right back to where you're coming from, in Rwenzururu.
The Rwenzori story, of course, will continue to dominate news. I, however, think by the end of the first quarter of the year, it will be as silent as forever. Peace efforts are already ongoing. We already know for a fact that the president has met all the opinion leaders. He has met the MPs. He has met local leaders. He has also met members from the kingdom. The kingdom, though, might be expedited as we know it at the moment.
Let's use the English word that many of us will understand. Expedited, but they will be expanded, will be kicked out.
It might be expunged. Not entirely, but in terms of the political strength it had and the military strength it had, the military might. So the strength of the Rwenzururu kingdom, as we knew it then, might go down.
Or strength tested and tried anywhere, or simply strength out of being talked about? Because the last I checked, the only time they've attempted to carry out a battle with any force, they were almost annihilated.
No. It's tried and tested strengths. If you know the history of the Rwenzururu movement, they have sustained a civil war against this country, Uganda, for some time. But they also have, the population of the Rwenzururu kingdom is 6 million on the DRC, and the DRC will have a vote in 2017, which might as well become very political. So we're going to have a very tricky year for events coming from the Rwenzururu kingdom, but I don't think it will dominate news stories.
But when we look at the way we've been covering these stories, of course, much of the criticism coming to you very specifically is that you are embedded on one side of the force. You are within the embedment of the UPDF, and that was in itself a disability in your quest to get the voices of the other side of the story. How do you intend to do this differently this time around? Are you now with enough balls to go out it on your own without being embedded?
I think many of the critics of journalism, and I have argued this in other public forums, are largely ignorant of the way journalism is done. There's nowhere in the world where conflict happens that journalists will walk in straight. You have to take calculated decisions on how you tell stories. Even the Kasese story that many people talk about were only embedded for one day of the entire coverage that we gave the Kasese region, which was about a whole month. I can't for a fact say that you will be embedded on the other side. We have told the story from both sides of the coin, and particularly at the start of the year in 2016, we went when there was no conflict and told a very expansive story on the victims that had suffered this conflict, the people that had perpetuated the conflict, what they wanted, and then what the state reaction was to that. And if only people had watched that feature then and paid as much attention, would never have had the bloodbath that happened later. But largely we have non-functional institutions which do not respond to even good journalism, that don't even respond to calls. I can tell you for a fact, I called the Interreligious Council about 2 days before the standoff at the palace happened and asked them, what are you doing for peace? And they said, we don't know anything that's happening in Kasese. And when the fighting happened, they had a press release in the next 15 minutes condemning the violence. And
then the former Archbishop was there to lay wreaths and all sorts of things.
Yes.
And it tells you something. I mean, you did allude to the fact of a short attention span. Do you, as a journalist, practicing journalist, get the frustration of the fact that the audience to which you want to draw attention does actually have a very short attention span, that they are always swinging like pendulum, so to speak, to use that one, and they never really focus on the gist of what you're telling them, for the most part, that they even miss a building up story only coming when it spikes highs.
It's short attention spans are something that the entire world is suffering from because of the information age. People are exposed to a lot of information, and they try to conceive as much as they can in the very little time that they have access to it.
Talk about time, I'll now take you right to another subject of discussion. The political standoffs that we've seen characterizing much of 2016. We had an election at the beginning of the year. It went the way it did. And for a long time, there's been, the election was rigged and all that. So much so that just yesterday, the usual, I wanted to say contender, then Dr. Kizza Besigye did say he is people's government, people's president, people's everything. Now we need to expand the imposter on the regime. If we must have a conversation with it, must be structured, and all that. How much of that do you expect to go into 2017?
As a journalist, of course, I have consistently argued that the election story has never ended, because precisely the election was never resolved. Courts of law might have done their part, but the excesses of the regime in blocking Besigye during the days when he should have actually collected evidence to challenge the election in court. The many irregularities.
You're convinced that Besigye wanted to go to court?
Not convinced. I'm just saying that what happened, the events as they happened, mean that the story is still going on. And of course, the damning election observer reports, 3 of the 4 reputable reports saying the election wasn't very fair, wasn't credible, and didn't meet the standards of free and fair election across the world. So our election was never resolved. And because of the fact that it wasn't resolved, we now have a standoff between someone who is the president, the sworn-in president at the moment, and one who challenges that authority and says this was a usurped authority. I don't think anywhere in the near future this standoff will be resolved.
But how do we cover it differently from what it is? Because when you look at the headline today, it's a headline that could as well have sufficed 3 months, 7 months ago. What is the fresh angle we're getting to Ugandans? Don't you think that we risk riding a certain horse that many people are not simply paying attention to?
I think American journalism has taught us that journalism should not try to drive a political conversation. We saw at the start of, or at the end of the year, when New York Times, Washington Post, the reputable news organizations endorsing a candidate, and that candidate loses the election, and then you have a tricky future, because now you have a presidency that doesn't believe that journalism can serve its ends. What I think journalism can do is offer light, as usual, be a platform for both sides to engage. And also, it would be nice if we would actually drive the agenda for dialogue, as they say it.
But that is here internally. But remember, this year, 2017, we'll have elections across the region. Kenya votes, Congo
Rwanda
possibly votes,
DRC,
Rwanda votes,
South
Sudan possibly will vote. That's one we cannot be very sure. You only sure until it happens. So is DRC. But you can see that we're in the middle of an election year for much of the region. And so perhaps also our attention will be spread thin, because remember, the very circumstances that bedevil our election here don't seem to be alien to these other countries. And so how much time do we have to concentrate on our local politics when we have more interesting stuff happening outside the borders that in fact do influence the way things are done? I mean, you know, the Kenyan election, when they catch a cold, we catch a terrible flu here.
It's a symbiotic relationship. The reason why we care about the Kenyan election is because it will hurt us here. And you will see it in, and that's why I'm saying the political future of Uganda will not be decided in 2017, because if Kenya votes, we'll have a freeze up here if that election does not go peacefully, freely, fairly, and credible as it should be. And if, because Kenya is our major export destination, it's also where all our imports come through. If the DRC fails to vote, there's a fear that the FDLR, FRC, the M23, ADF might remobilize. But also, here you have a kingdom that's sitting at the corner of the DRC that has been angered by the state and that has consistently voted the opposition. And the opposition has now set a political standoff with the state. So it will be interesting in the coming year to watch this. But also, Simon, I feel like we need to talk about the development agenda of the country.
Absolutely.
Because part of the political standoff is now how the incumbent president deals with the rising standoff. If he continues to use state machinery and power, I think we shall boil down into conflict.
Well, but you heard him in his end of year, beginning of year message, where in his conclusion say that Uganda has been peaceful for the first time in 500 years, and nobody is going to destabilize that peace. And you know, when he speaks like that, there is a lot of connotations to what he means. Do you think President Museveni is going to behave differently this time around and give bouquets of flowers to demonstrators, or it will still be the same old iron hand repression of anyone that comes out to do the wearing around?
I think the president would live in utopia if he says that nobody can disturb the peace of his country, because the peace of this country hinges on the people of this country. We have very high and skyrocketing unemployment rates to start with. We have almost 8 out of 10 Ugandans living in poverty. There.
What do you in the media do other than simply highlighting the statistics? How much more can you highlight the plight of these unemployed people for perhaps, if for nothing else, someone to take note? Because clearly, not many people are watching.
We can continue to do impactful journalism, and that's hard, critical, investigative journalism, which we haven't done for a long time, which has been lying in the rubbles. I still feel like journalism... Why so? Do you lack facilitation of any form? Is there just no will within the administration of the newsrooms where we all come from to put through these? Or are we become so susceptible to this daily bread kind of journalism where he said, she said, it's happening, they're happening? We'd have to have that discussion under Chatham House rules, not under the full view of the press. But there are really broad challenges. For example, staffing of newsrooms. People underestimate how much that can go a long way. I can't work on a 3-month project because the staffing of the newsroom doesn't allow that to happen. I have to consistently come back and do the daily news. Those small things that even if I had, for example, an investigation in tax avoidance on a particular company, and that would require almost 4 months of paying close attention to, even if I can guarantee my newsroom that I'm able to get a grant from anywhere to get that money here, the effect of time, the effect of impact, how will it run, the powers that be, the politics of running a story at the end of the
nature,
day, yes, that all impacts on how journalism can deliver.
So are we simply trying to say that now even journalism as it is has become a hostage of the status quo, that you, even when you have the will and the facilitation to do an earth-shattering investigation, it simply won't see the light of day?
I don't think. I think there's a conflict in journalism, and I think it's an ongoing struggle. And right now, nobody should lie to you. There's more journalism being done now than has ever been done anywhere in this
mainstream, or is it social media and
not just social media, even investigations, for example. The investigations that dominated the 20th century journalism of the Andrew Mwendas, was...
Are we now in another century? Oh my goodness,
lack
I didn't know
of information.
how time runs.
For example, if a chopper went down and you were able to access that information, that became an investigation.
Absolutely.
Now, with the information age, that's not news anymore.
True.
So there's more digging being done. I saw my friend Giles Mohammed exposing the URS scandal, how people paid themselves money. All this is critical investigative journalism, which, luckily for us,
could it even have been done in just one day? He possibly had all this information coming in tidbits for months on end.
Yes, if you saw and if you read through the story, clearly it shows he went over a month going over those facts and figures. But luckily for us, even in the rushed way we do journalism, Justice Mulenga saved us the fact that you can tell a lie if you believe it is in public interest, or if it was presented to you falsely. That's the future for journalism. At least we can stand up and tell stories, knowing that
you can run back.
Yes, we can always run back to the Justice Mulenga argument and say, well, this is what we believe to be true at that time.
That's setting the stage now for 2017, and how, because of course for much of what the information that people get out there is on the premise of good journalism. Now let's look at some of the key tenets of development that this country for the most part is looking forward to, at least to have a brick on the ground. You had the president talking about these some of the bottlenecks that we have our development and our quest to go into middle income status. He's talking about infrastructure, he's talking about value addition in agriculture, and obviously he's talking about energy. The two flagship hydropower plants of Karuma and Isimba won't be online in 2017, at least that's not the promise. But are you able, as journalism, are you keeping an eye on those to ensure that even though they promised 2018, you've got to keep an eye on the ground to ensure that if there are any cracks, it comes out in the papers. If there is any dingy something here and there, it comes out and holds the contractors and the supervisors and the government agencies implementing them on their tenterhooks and keep them awake in the night.
I have been a very lucky journalist in 2016 because I covered, I think, 95% of Uganda's development agenda. I saw the SGR, I saw all the dams, I visited the roads. And I can say, for example, that the fact that journalism wants to pay attention to development agenda when there are problems is a problem in itself. We need to start to pay attention to them
in peacetime, so to speak.
Yes. So, for example, can we have a weekly update on, for example, the hydropower projects? Because this is heavy investment of both donor money, taxpayer money, concessional loans that we're going to pay back at the end of the day. But also, this is the development future of the country. You know for a fact that only 1 in 10 Ugandans have access to electricity. They're looking forward to these dams coming on and the transmission increasing, and then people will be able to have
and then, of course, the age-old promise from President Museveni over affordable electricity.
The SGR, people undermine how much the SGR will do, but for a fact, the SGR will reduce the amount of time we transport goods from Uganda to the port.
Absolutely.
From 7 days to just 45 minutes or within 1 hour. And that's
but you see, all that is still on paper. The SGR, for example, is still on paper. It's stuff you're reading about, and yet in Kenya you're seeing wagons being delivered. So there's that impatience that Ugandans are looking out for, and perhaps you in journalism are not holding the SGR Uganda to the highest level of scrutiny to tell us exactly what's going on. We still have situations where we have entire villages in the route that are saying, no, we cannot get out of the route for the SGR simply because we are bona fide occupants of a forest reserve. And so that is still going on. I don't know.
I think Uganda suffered the misfortune of this SGR because you can't lay the rail in Uganda unless Kenya starts laying the rail in Nakuru. And Kenya has not yet reached Nakuru.
True.
What we have done here is really move ahead of ourselves, pay out all the compensation that is required to be paid. Of course, I think there's a project delay of about a month or so, but that doesn't mean that the Kenyans didn't have a project delay. Actually, the Kenyans have major project delays, which meant that if we had started our rail as early as we wanted to, would be incurring the cost of keeping staff right now idle.
Yes, because
on the project. Yes, and I feel like journalism hasn't paid enough attention to this development
Why
agenda.
do you think journalism doesn't pay attention to this kind of development agenda in peacetime? Is it because the audience to which we present these stories is least interested about things that do not cause a staccato of emotion?
No, I think it is Robert Thorne or something, the person who developed the light bulb, who asked that if I'd asked people whether they wanted, what they wanted from a candle, they'd have asked a brighter candle. That's journalism cannot be asking people, what do you want? And I feel that's where we really need to settle down, because we are offering a lot of time to telling stories that don't impact people's lives. We're offering a lot of time to riots, to protests, to, not that they shouldn't be reported, but the context within which we report them should also change. There's a heavy growth and development agenda happening, but also happening at a time when there's a lot of political instability within the country. So how do you report both? How do you offer balance side to both? For now, what it looks like we're doing, we've offered the political instability a lot of coverage and the development agenda little coverage. But even if we resolve the politics of the day, we'll still go back to the development agenda, because that's the future of our
Perhaps
country.
you can't even resolve the politics of the day unless the development agenda has been put on course, because people who end up in political acrimony are those who feel disenfranchised from the development agenda. They're not part of the development.
Exactly. And I feel in 2017, that's what journalism should do. Try to link as much as we can what we see in our politics to the development agenda.
As we conclude, you have brilliant ideas, Raymond, but I'm asking myself, you're just mere Raymond Mujuni. How much of these brilliant ideas do you think hold sway in the organization where you work and other organizations that are watching you this morning who may want to change the agenda? How much influence do you as an individual journalist at your level have on the way journalism is run, managed and executed?
Very little, very little. And Simon, you'd know how newsrooms run. As a young journalist, the most you can do really is sell your ideas. But that doesn't mean there are not extra platforms to do good journalism. I could still go back at the end of the day and write blogs and put up vlogs perhaps and decrypt.
You call it vlogs?
Yes.
That's a video blog, right?
Yes. And decrypt this whole fuss that we're in. And I have consistently said that if journalism as we know it, if the traditional newsrooms do not adapt to the changing situations
quick enough,
yes, we'll have no choice, but as journalists we'll have to innovate outside them. And there's nothing as painful as innovating outside traditional newsrooms, because we'll collapse them without doubt.
But also you also risk running into trouble because you don't have much of holds barred and they're all adherence to proper tenets of good journalism. But also importantly, the finances. Raymond, you forget that you are not in this simply because you're a charity organization. You are in it also to earn a living.
Yeah, I have studied the models of journalism across the world, and Kenya is a good starting point. There was a time when KTN was the biggest investigative journalism hub in Kenya. Their lead investigations editor left them and set up his own franchise called African Censored. And their job really is just investigate stories, and then we can sell them to the TVs and then also broadcast them on web. And there's a lot of grants out there to do critical investigative journalism, one, to pay journalists, two, but also with rising interest in
governance issues and all
that. And the public will decide. The public at the end of the day will come and watch a story and say, this is a protest story. Let me just go to Raymond's page and see what he has to say about this.
Wow.
And that's how newsrooms will collapse if they don't innovate around themselves, if they don't start to listen to the young voices, because the young voices are the future of not just Uganda, the continent, the world as well.
Raymond Mujuni, always refreshing to have this conversation with you and setting the stage at least for the way journalism will have to adopt itself or even cover the stories in the best way they possibly can for us to keep informed as a populace in 2017. Do you have any regrets from how you covered 2016, all these stories that you were involved in, or even the way your colleagues did? What do you think was this story that was given the worst injustice, the best injustice, if I may use that term?
We did suffer a lot of setbacks. Our corruption stories, there's a lot of massive corruption that happened in 2016. There's a lot of government officials who stole money that we consistently just referred to as corrupt people. We need to be more abrasive as journalism, and the old tax disagree with us, but I feel like we should call thieves thieves, full stop.
Don't glorify them with names of corrupt officials, alleged corruption.
You can't justify, for example, how World Bank funding was withheld from us to construct roads. You can't justify, for example, how all this opium scandal played out and how we ended up losing funding from the EU, from other sources. These ministers were taking kickbacks on projects. Ministers were asking for school fees for their children on projects.
And that you've picked not just from hearsay, but even the president has said that in his speeches, decrying and crying.
Yes.
But you never take the extra mile to expose this.
No, we actually have the capacity and ability to expose these people. It's just that the internal workings of media houses, together with the politics of the day, can't allow the light of the day to shine on stories like this.
Well, Raymond, we couldn't cap it on a better note than that one. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Big Story, and we hope that we can hold you to your word and look forward to an incredible story cachet in 2017, but also interestingly, how you set the news agenda much more to the development agenda as opposed to the politics, in as much as we'll be in a situation of a lot of political activity in the region. Thank you. It's been a big story here, indeed big as big it can get, having this conversation with Raymond and sharing with us what he believes the way to go for 2017 if we must get all the stories that we should be getting them. Stay with us. It's morning at NTV. We'll return same place, same time tomorrow with yet another conversation on the big stories. Stay with us and don't move.